The chess player who silenced death. ROW. The chaplain's hands trembled as he slid the chessboard through the slot. Cell Block D had seen 3 murders in 6 months, and now he was about to meet the man who'd stopped them all, without throwing a single punch. What Father Miguel didn't know was that the quiet Asian woman sitting cross-legged on that concrete floor had once been the youngest Grandmaster in chess history, and that every move she'd made in this prison was calculated 15 steps ahead. Stay with me until the end, because what she did in the final game will rewrite everything you think you know about survival. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Redwood State Penitentiary doesn't announce itself with sirens or searchlights. It sits in the Oregon mountains like a gray tombstone, surrounded by forests so thick that even sound gets swallowed. The locals don't talk about it. They don't have to. Everyone within 50 miles knows that when you go to Redwood, you don't come back the same. If you come back at all. Dr. Naomi Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, when the fog was so dense the transport van had to crawl the last 3 miles. She was 31 years old, barely 5'3", with wire-rimmed glasses and hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. The other women on the van, 7 in total, sized her up immediately. Prison teaches you to read people in seconds. Naomi's expensive education was written all over her. The way she sat with perfect posture, the absence of any street scars, the tiny furrow between her eyebrows that screamed overachiever. "What's a lady doctor doing in a place like this?" asked a woman with tear tattoos beneath her left eye. Her name was Rhonda, though Naomi wouldn't learn that until later. Naomi didn't answer. She'd learned in the county jail during her trial that silence was its own kind of armor. Let them wonder. Let them fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. The truth was always more complicated than anyone wanted to believe. The processing took 9 hours. Strip searches. Medical examinations that felt designed to humiliate rather than inform. Photographs from every angle. A counselor who asked questions while barely looking up from her clipboard. History of mental illness? Suicidal ideation? Gang affiliations? To that last question, Naomi almost laughed. The only gang she'd ever belonged to was the United States Chess Federation, and they'd stripped her of her membership the day she was arrested. Her cell assignment came with a warning from Sergeant Rita Bowman, a woman whose face looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the prison walls. "Block D is maximum security," Bowman said, her voice flat. "You're Category 3, violent offender. That means 23 hours lockdown. 1 hour recreation in a cage by yourself. No physical contact with other inmates. No exceptions." "I understand," Naomi said. Bowman studied her with eyes that had seen every kind of inmate walk through these halls. "You don't look like you belong here, Dr. Chen. But then again, the ones who look innocent are usually the most dangerous." The walk to Block D took them through corridors that smelled of industrial cleaner, trying desperately to mask something more organic underneath. Other inmates pressed against their cell doors as Naomi passed, their voices calling out assessments that ranged from crude to simply curious. "Fresh meat. Look at those glasses, you a teacher? Hey China doll, you lost?" Naomi kept her eyes forward. Her attorney had prepared her for this part. The first days would be about establishing hierarchy, about the other inmates figuring out where she fit in the food chain. The key was to show neither fear nor aggression. Just calm neutrality. Cell D47 was barely larger than a parking space. A metal bunk bolted to the wall. A toilet with no seat. A sink that dripped with metronomic consistency. One small window, reinforced with wire mesh, that showed nothing but gray sky. Her cellmate was already there, a muscular white woman in her 40s with a shaved head and scars that told stories Naomi wasn't sure she wanted to hear. She looked up from a tattered paperback as Naomi entered. "Well, ain't you a surprise?" the woman said. Her voice carried a southern accent worn smooth by years of suppression. "Name's Cricket. Been in this box for 14 months. You got a name, or should I just make one up?" "Naomi." "Naomi," Cricket repeated, testing the syllables. "What did you do, Naomi? You don't look like the killing type, but then again, neither did I before I became one. In prison, your crime is your currency. It determines respect, fear, and survival." Naomi had been advised by her lawyer to keep the details vague, but Cricket's eyes suggested that vagueness would breed more problems than honesty. "Manslaughter," Naomi said quietly. Medical malpractice that led to a patient's death. Cricket's eyebrows rose. They putting doctors in max security now? Must have been some patient. Something like that. The older woman nodded slowly, accepting the boundary. Fair enough. Everybody's got their story. Mine involved my ex-husband, a baseball bat, and 20 years of beatings. I finally decided to return all at once. She paused. You play cards? Chess. Cricket laughed, sharp and sudden. Chess. In here, that's like saying you play polo. Good luck finding someone who knows how the little horses move. That first night, Naomi lay on the thin mattress and listened to the symphony of incarceration. Distant screaming. The clang of metal on metal. Somewhere, a woman was singing, badly, but with such conviction that it almost sounded beautiful. The air tasted metallic, like blood and rust mixed together, but Naomi didn't cry. She'd used up all her tears during the trial, watching her life dismantle itself piece by piece. The medical license revoked. The research grants cancelled. Her parents refusing to attend the sentencing, unable to face the shame of their daughter, their brilliant daughter, the chess prodigy who'd made Grandmaster at 19, standing in an orange jumpsuit being led away in chains. No, there were no tears left. Only calculation. Only the need to survive this place long enough to prove her innocence. Because that was the part the jury hadn't understood. She hadn't killed anyone. She tried to save a life, and when that life ended despite everything she'd done, someone needed to be blamed. The next morning brought her first glimpse of the prison's true hierarchy. Breakfast was served in a common area, not a traditional cafeteria, but a secured room where inmates from different cells were brought in shifts, always under heavy guard presence. Maximum security meant eating while shackled to your table. Naomi shuffled in with her group, wrists bound by chains connected to a belt around her waist. The room held maybe 30 women, all secured to their assigned spots. The guards stood along the walls, hands resting on tasers, watching everything with the bored vigilance of people who'd seen violence become routine. That's when Naomi first saw her. The woman sat alone at a table near the back, and somehow everyone else had created a radius of empty space around her. She was enormous, at least 6'2", with shoulders like a linebacker and arms covered in tattoos that depicted scenes Naomi couldn't quite make out from this distance. Her head was shaved clean, revealing a skull that looked like it had been designed to crack other skulls. But it was her eyes that stopped Naomi cold. They were scanning the room with mechanical precision, cataloging every face, every movement, every potential threat or opportunity. That's Reaper, Cricket whispered beside her. They'd been shackled to adjacent spots. Real name's Rebecca Kovacs, but nobody's called her that in 10 years. She runs Block D, guards let her because she keeps order better than they ever could. How? Naomi asked. Cricket's voice dropped even lower. Any way she needs to. Last woman who challenged her authority ended up in medical for 3 months. Lost an eye. Guards said it was an accident during rec time. The food arrived, grey slop that might have once been oatmeal, toast so hard it could double as a weapon, coffee that was more rumor than reality. Naomi ate mechanically, her brain already working on the puzzle that was this environment. In chess, you didn't survive by being the strongest piece. You survived by understanding the board, by seeing patterns others missed, by thinking 10 moves ahead while everyone else was stuck on move 2. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Reaper approaching until the massive woman was standing directly beside their table. The room went silent. Even the guards tensed. Reaper looked down at Naomi with those mechanical eyes. Up close, her tattoos resolved into images, snakes, skulls, and what looked like a scoreboard of tally marks running down her right arm. You're the new one, Reaper said. Her voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. The doctor who killed somebody. Naomi forced herself to maintain eye contact. In the animal kingdom, looking away signaled submission. She wasn't ready to submit yet. Naomi Chen, she said evenly. Chen, Reaper repeated. Asian. Educated. Small. She leaned down, bringing her face closer. Her breath smelled of tobacco and something darker. Tell me, Dr. Chen, what possible use could you be to me? The question hung in the air like a blade. This was a test, Naomi realized. Maybe the most important test she'd face in this place. Answer wrong, and she'd spend the next 3 years as someone's target. Answer right, and maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to survive. I can teach, Naomi heard herself say. Reaper's eyebrows rose slightly. Teach what? How to prescribe pills? How to fill out insurance forms? Chess. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Several inmates nearby laughed, nervous, uncertain laughter that suggested they weren't sure if this was bravery or suicide, but Reaper didn't laugh. She straightened slowly, her expression unreadable. Chess, she said finally. The game with the little pieces. The game of strategy, Naomi corrected quietly. The game where the weakest piece on the board can checkmate a king if positioned correctly. For a long moment, Reaper just stared at her. Then, without another word, the massive woman turned and walked back to her table. The room exhaled collectively. Naomi realized her hands were shaking beneath the table. What the hell was that? Cricket whispered urgently. You trying to get yourself killed? But Naomi was watching Reaper's back, watching the way the other inmates gave her space, and an idea was beginning to form. A crazy, impossible idea that would require precision, patience, and the willingness to risk everything on a single gambit. That afternoon, during the 1 hour of recreation time, Naomi was led to a cage, literally a chain-link enclosure barely large enough to walk 5 steps in any direction. This was outdoor time, though the cage was covered and offered no real access to fresh air. She was alone, as promised. Category 3 inmates didn't mix during rec time. Naomi began to pace, her mind working through the problem like she'd worked through thousands of chess problems as a child. The prison was a board. The inmates were pieces, each with their own movement patterns and constraints. Reaper was obviously the queen, most powerful, most mobile, most dangerous. The guards were like rooks, strong in straight lines but blind to diagonal threats, and Naomi? She was a pawn. Weak, restricted, seemingly insignificant. But pawns, when played correctly, could change everything. The next morning, Naomi did something unprecedented. She requested a meeting with the prison administrator, not for a complaint, not for a legal issue, but for what she called an educational proposal. It took 2 weeks for the meeting to be approved. 2 weeks during which Naomi kept her head down, learned the rhythms of Block D, and watched. Always watching, she learned that Reaper controlled everything through a network of debts and favors. An extra dessert here. Protection from a violent inmate there. Information about upcoming shakedowns. Nothing happened in Block D without Reaper's knowledge or permission, and everyone, even the guards, seemed to accept this arrangement as the natural order. She learned that Cricket had been a high school math teacher before the incident with her husband. That beneath the prison-tough exterior was a woman who solved equations in her head to stay sane. She learned that the woman in the cell above theirs, Maria, had been a professional dancer before drug addiction destroyed her career and led to the armed robbery that earned her 15 years. She learned that the youngest inmate in their block, a 19-year-old named Ashley, had killed her stepfather who'd been abusing her since she was 12. Ashley read fantasy novels obsessively, escaping into worlds where magic solved problems that the legal system couldn't. Each woman was a piece on the board. Each had her own range of motion, her own capabilities, her own value. Finally, the meeting was granted. Warden Sarah Brennan was nothing like Naomi expected. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and hands marked by what looked like old burn scars. Her office was surprisingly warm, wooden furniture instead of metal, plants on the windowsill, photographs of children who might have been grandchildren. Dr. Chen, she said, gesturing to a chair. I understand you have a proposal. Naomi had prepared this speech in her head 100 times. Warden Brennan, I'd like to start a chess program for the inmates. Brennan's expression didn't change. Go on. Studies show that chess improves cognitive function, impulse control, and pattern recognition. It teaches strategic thinking and delayed gratification, 2 skills that are crucial for successful re-entry into society. Naomi leaned forward slightly. These women need tools. Not just job training or GED programs, but mental tools that help them think differently about problems and consequences. And you think chess provides those tools? I know it does. I've been playing since I was 6 years old. Chess taught me discipline, patience, and how to think 15 moves ahead. It taught me that every action has consequences that ripple forward in ways you can't always predict. Brennan was quiet for a long moment, studying Naomi with those kind, sharp eyes. You do realize that you're serving time for consequences you claim not to have predicted. The words hit like a physical blow, but Naomi kept her composure. Yes? Which is exactly why I understand how crucial these skills are. I made decisions without fully considering all possible outcomes. I was so focused on the immediate problem that I didn't see the larger pattern forming. Tell me about your patient, Brennan said suddenly. The one who died. Naomi felt her throat tighten. This wasn't part of the prepared speech. His name was David Reeves. 43 years old. Father of 2. He came into the ER with chest pain and shortness of breath. Classic cardiac symptoms. But it wasn't cardiac. No. It was a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in his lungs. By the time we realized what was really happening, it was too late. The clot dislodged during treatment and caused massive cardiac arrest. Naomi's voice remained steady, clinical. She'd learned to tell this story without emotion because emotion made people stop listening. The prosecution argued that I missed clear diagnostic signs. That I was negligent in my evaluation. And your defense? Was that I made the best decision I could with the information available in that moment. That medicine isn't chess, you can't always see 15 moves ahead. Sometimes you have to act on incomplete information. She paused. The jury disagreed. Brennan nodded slowly, then stood and moved to her window. Outside, the Oregon mountains stretched endlessly, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in their shadow. I've been running this prison for 12 years, Dr. Chen. In that time, I've seen every kind of rehabilitation program proposed. Art therapy, music therapy, yoga, meditation. Most of them fail because they are built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what prison does to people. She turned back to face Naomi. Prison doesn't just remove freedom. It removes agency. Every decision, when you eat, when you sleep, when you speak, is controlled by someone else. The inmates who survive are the ones who find ways to reclaim some sense of control, even if it's just control over their own thoughts. Chess gives them that, Naomi said quietly. In chess, every move is your choice. Every consequence is yours to own. Exactly. Brennan returned to her desk. Which is why I'm approving your program. You'll have access to the common room twice a week for 2 hours. I'll provide chess sets, cheap plastic ones that can't be weaponized. You can teach anyone who volunteers. Relief flooded through Naomi, but she kept her expression neutral. Thank you, Warden. Don't thank me yet. You'll be teaching the most violent women in the Oregon penal system. Women who've solved their problems with knives and fists and rage. Women who don't think 15 moves ahead because they're usually not thinking past the next 15 seconds. Brennan's eyes hardened slightly. And if this program causes any problems, any fights, any contraband, any disruptions, it ends immediately. Understood. Understood. As Naomi was led back to her cell, her mind was already racing. The first class would be crucial. She'd need to make it accessible enough for beginners but interesting enough for anyone with experience. More importantly, she'd need to get Reaper to attend, because Naomi had realized something during her weeks of observation. Reaper wasn't just enforcing order through violence. She was playing a game, moving pieces around the board of Block D with calculated precision. The woman was a natural strategist, even if she didn't know it yet, and if Naomi could teach Reaper to see the board clearly, to understand the deeper patterns of strategy and consequence, maybe, just maybe, she could change the entire game. The first chess class was held on a Wednesday afternoon in early November. Naomi arrived early, her hands full of cheap plastic chess sets that clicked together with all the craftsmanship of disposable cutlery. The common room had been set up with 4 tables, each with space for 2 players. No one showed up for the first 30 minutes. Naomi sat alone, trying not to feel the weight of failure pressing down on her. She'd convinced the warden, convinced herself that this could work, but she'd forgotten the most basic rule of prison. Inmates didn't volunteer for anything unless there was clear personal benefit. She was about to pack up when the door opened. Cricket walked in first, followed by Maria and 3 other women Naomi recognized from breakfast. They took seats slowly, their body language defensive. Heard you're teaching some kind of game, Cricket said. Figured it beat staring at the wall for 2 hours. Before Naomi could respond, the door opened again. Reaper entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She moved to the back table and sat down heavily, her massive frame making the chair look like children's furniture. Teach, she said simply. Naomi took a breath and began. Chess is a game of infinite possibility, she said, setting up a board in the center of the room where everyone could see. There are more possible chess games than there are atoms in the observable universe. Every game you play will be unique, unrepeatable. Sounds boring, one of the women muttered. It's the opposite of boring. It's about control in a world designed to remove your control. It's about making choices when everything else is chosen for you. Naomi picked up a pawn. This is the weakest piece on the board. It can only move forward, one square at a time. It can never go back. Sound familiar? A few heads nodded. In prison, you couldn't undo the past. You could only move forward. But here's the thing about pawns, Naomi continued. If a pawn makes it all the way across the board, if it survives long enough to reach the opposite end, it transforms. It becomes a queen, the most powerful piece in the game. Weak becomes strong. Limited becomes unlimited. She could see she had their attention now. In the next 2 hours, I'm going to teach you how the pieces move. Next week, we'll play actual games. But I want you to remember something. In chess, strength isn't about being the biggest piece or making the loudest moves. It's about seeing the pattern, understanding position, and knowing when to sacrifice something small to gain something greater. For the next 90 minutes, Naomi taught them the basics. How the pawns march forward. How the knights leap in their strange L shapes. How the bishops slice diagonally, never changing color. How the rooks dominate straight lines. How the queen combines all powers. How the king, despite being the most important piece, is also the weakest, moving just one slow square at a time. Most of the women struggled with the concepts. Years of survival thinking had trained them for immediate action, not patient planning. But Cricket absorbed it quickly, her math teacher's brain delighting in the geometric precision. Maria approached it like choreography, visualizing the pieces dancing across the board, and Reaper? Reaper just watched. She didn't touch a piece for the entire first session. She just sat at her back table, those mechanical eyes tracking every movement, every explanation, every demonstration. When the class ended, she stood and left without a word. Don't feel bad, Cricket said as they packed up the sets. Reaper don't trust nothing new. She'll come around or she won't. But Naomi wasn't worried. She'd seen something in Reaper's eyes during that class, a hunger, a recognition. The woman was already playing the game in her head. The second class had 12 attendees. The third had 21. By the fourth week, Warden Brennan had to cap attendance at 30 because the common room couldn't safely hold more. Something was happening in Block D, something the guards couldn't quite explain. The usual tension had eased. Fights that would normally erupt over stolen food or perceived disrespect were being resolved with words instead of fists. Women who'd been enemies for years were sitting across chess boards from each other, focused on the game rather than old grudges, and Reaper came to every single class. She still didn't play. She just watched, occasionally asking questions that revealed a mind working through problems at impressive speed. Why would you sacrifice a bishop to take a pawn? She asked one day. Because that pawn is blocking a crucial square, Naomi explained, demonstrating on the board. Sometimes you trade material for position. The bishop has more theoretical value, but in this specific situation, removing that pawn opens up lines of attack that are worth more than the piece you lose. Reaper nodded slowly. Position over power. Exactly. It was after the sixth class that Reaper finally approached Naomi directly. The other women had filtered out, leaving them alone in the common room with 2 guards stationed by the door. Play me, Reaper said. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. You sure? You haven't practiced yet. I've been practicing for 6 weeks. In my head. Reaper sat down at the table and began setting up pieces. Every game I've watched, I've replayed later in my cell. Every strategy you've taught, I've tested against itself. I'm ready. They played for an hour. Naomi won, but barely. Reaper's game was raw and aggressive, full of tactical violence but lacking long-term strategy. She sacrificed pieces too quickly, going for immediate attacks rather than building sustainable pressure. But the raw pattern recognition was there, the ability to see threats and opportunities that most beginners would miss entirely. You have potential, Naomi said as she reset the board. But you're playing like you fight, all aggression, no patience. Reaper's jaw tightened. Aggression works in the short term, but chess rewards patience. The best players are the ones who can build pressure slowly, move by move, until their opponent has no good options left. Naomi met those mechanical eyes. You control block D through force. But what happens when someone stronger comes along? Or when the guards decide your usefulness doesn't outweigh your danger? Is this about chess or something else? It's always about something else, Naomi said quietly. Chess is just the language we're using to discuss it. They played again. And again. Over the next 3 months, Reaper became Naomi's most dedicated student. She stopped running block D through intimidation and started using the skills chess was teaching her: reading situations, predicting responses, finding solutions that didn't require violence. The change didn't go unnoticed. Warden Brennan called Naomi in for another meeting in early February. "Whatever you're doing is working," Brennan said without preamble. "Violent incidents in Block D are down 43%. Medical treatment for inmate injuries has dropped by half. Even the guards have noticed. The women are communicating differently, thinking before reacting. Chess teaches consequence," Naomi said. "Every move creates ripples. I want to expand the program to the other blocks. All security levels, all inmates who want to participate. I'm authorizing funds for proper chess sets, timers, even a prison tournament if interest is high enough." Brennan leaned back in her chair. "You've done something remarkable here, Dr. Chen. You've given these women something most of them have never had, a way to feel powerful that doesn't involve hurting someone." But Naomi barely heard the praise. Her mind was stuck on one phrase: prison tournament. An idea was forming. Dangerous. Impossible. But maybe, just maybe, it was the move she'd been waiting for. That night, she wrote a letter to her appellate attorney. Then she lay awake until dawn, playing through the possibilities, looking for the flaw in her strategy. She couldn't find one. The prison tournament was announced 3 weeks later. Open to all inmates, all security levels. Bracket-style elimination. The winner would receive a trophy, recognition in the prison newspaper, and a certificate suitable for inclusion in parole hearings. But more importantly, the tournament would be observed by an outside organization, the Northwest Chess Foundation, which had agreed to send certified arbiters to ensure official rules were followed, official observers. Outside witnesses. Exactly what Naomi needed. The tournament began in late March, with 64 participants spread across 4 days of competition. The prison had set up the gymnasium as a tournament hall, with boards arranged in neat rows and a projection screen showing the top games for spectators. Naomi, as the program's founder and a former Grandmaster, had been designated head instructor and couldn't compete. But she didn't need to compete. She needed to orchestrate. The early rounds went as expected. Experienced players advanced easily. Newcomers learned hard lessons about preparation and time management. But by the semifinals, something unexpected had emerged. Reaper had fought her way to the final four. Her opponent in the semifinal was a woman from Block A named Torres, a former accountant serving time for embezzlement who'd been playing chess casually for 20 years. Torres was technical and precise, exactly the kind of player who should have demolished Reaper's aggressive style, but Reaper had learned patience. She'd learned to build pressure. And in a tense game that stretched nearly 3 hours, she found the winning combination in a queen sacrifice that left Torres's king helpless. The final would be Reaper versus cricket. The entire prison turned out for the final game. Inmates from all blocks, guards, even some administrative staff. The gymnasium was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation. 2 women from Block D, both violent offenders, both transformed by a simple board game, about to face off for the championship. But Naomi wasn't watching the board. She was watching the observers from the Northwest Chess Foundation. Specifically, she was watching Dr. Raymond Keller, a man she'd known from her competitive chess days. A man who'd testified as a character witness during her trial, trying to convince the jury that the brilliant, compassionate woman he'd known couldn't possibly have been negligent. Keller caught her eye and nodded slightly. The signal they'd arranged, the game began. Cricket played her usual methodical style, building structure and limiting chaos. Reaper countered with controlled aggression, pressing for tactical opportunities while maintaining defensive stability. It was, by any measure, a beautiful game, the kind that demonstrated how far both players had evolved. But Naomi was barely watching. She was counting moves, waiting for the moment when the chess would stop mattering. It came in the middle game, when both players had committed their pieces and the position was roughly balanced. Naomi stood and walked to where Dr. Keller sat with the other observers. "May I speak with you privately?" she asked quietly. Keller excused himself and they stepped into a corner of the gymnasium, out of earshot but visible to the guards. "Thank you for coming," Naomi said. "Your letter was intriguing," Keller replied carefully. "You said you had evidence regarding your case." "Not evidence. Understanding." Naomi took a breath. "Dr. Keller, I've spent 8 months in this prison learning about pattern recognition and consequence. And I finally understand what happened the night David Reeves died. I'm listening. I made the right diagnosis. The treatment protocol was correct. But what I didn't see, what no one saw, was that David Reeves was being systematically poisoned." Keller's eyes widened. "What?" "His symptoms were consistent with pulmonary embolism, but they were also consistent with chronic exposure to certain anticoagulants. Someone had been giving him blood thinners without his knowledge, probably his business partner, who stood to inherit the company if Reeves died. When I administered standard cardiac medication in the ER, it interacted catastrophically with the drugs already in his system." "That's an extraordinary claim." "I know. And I can't prove it alone. But there's a pattern in Reeves's medical records, small inconsistencies that I missed because I was focused on the acute crisis. His platelet counts were abnormal for months before his death. His wife mentioned bruising easily. He'd complained to his primary care doctor about unusual fatigue." Naomi pulled a folded paper from her pocket, notes she'd written from memory of the case files. "If someone looks at the full pattern instead of just the final event, they'll see it." Keller took the notes, scanning them quickly. His expression shifted from skepticism to something else, possibility, maybe even belief. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because chess taught me to see the whole board. To understand that every piece of information is connected, that patterns reveal truth if you're patient enough to recognize them." She glanced back at the game, where Reaper and Cricket were deep in calculation. "And because I finally learned the most important lesson, sometimes the best move is admitting you need help." Dr. Keller nodded slowly. "I'll need to consult with your attorney. Get access to full medical records, interview people close to Reeves. This will take months, maybe years." "I have 3 years left on my sentence," Naomi said simply. "I can wait." They returned to the game. On the board, the position had shifted dramatically. Reaper had sacrificed her queen for 2 minor pieces and overwhelming pressure on Cricket's king. The crowd was silent, breathless. 5 moves later, Reaper delivered checkmate. The gymnasium erupted. Women who'd never spoken to each other were cheering together, united in celebration of something none of them fully understood but all of them could feel: the victory of transformation, of growth, of becoming something more than the worst thing you'd ever done. Reaper stood and extended her hand to Cricket. They shook, genuine respect passing between them. Then Reaper turned and looked at Naomi. The mechanical eyes had softened somehow, and for just a moment, Naomi saw not the prison enforcer but the woman underneath, someone who'd learned that power could be something other than violence. "Thank you," Reaper said simply. Naomi nodded. "You taught yourself. I just showed you the board." 18 months later, Naomi Chen walked out of Redwood State Penitentiary. The investigation Dr. Keller triggered had uncovered exactly what she'd suspected: a deliberate poisoning scheme that had made her look negligent. Her conviction was overturned. Her medical license was restored. Her life, broken apart by one terrible night, was slowly being reconstructed, but she didn't leave the prison behind. She returned every week to continue the chess program. She wrote articles about cognitive rehabilitation through strategic games. She testified before state legislature about the transformative power of teaching inmates to think in patterns and consequences. And she stayed in touch with her students. Cricket was released after 16 months and immediately enrolled in a community college to finish her teaching degree. She now teaches math at an alternative high school for at-risk youth. On her desk is a chess set, cheap plastic pieces that click together, and a photograph of her first tournament game. Maria discovered a talent for teaching chess to children and now runs a non-profit program connecting juvenile detention centers with mentors who use chess as intervention therapy. Ashley, the youngest, won a poetry contest and published a collection about transformation. The cover features a pawn reaching the final rank, moments from becoming a queen, and Reaper, Rebecca Kovacs, using her birth name again, served out her full sentence but emerged different. She got a job at a warehouse, lives alone, and plays chess online every evening. She's rated expert level now, still aggressive but tempered with the patience that Naomi taught her. They played one final game before Naomi left the prison. No clock, no pressure, just two people who taught each other about survival and transformation. Reaper won in 43 moves. "You let me win," she said afterward. Naomi smiled. "No. I taught you well enough that you didn't need me to let you. That was always the point." Father Miguel, the chaplain who'd brought that first chess set to cell block D, later wrote about the transformation he witnessed. "I thought I was bringing a game. What I actually brought was a language. A way for women who'd forgotten how to communicate without violence to rediscover patience, strategy, and hope." Dr. Chen didn't just teach them chess. She taught them that the person they'd become wasn't fixed. That transformation was possible. That every ending could also be a beginning. I asked her once what the most important lesson of chess was. She said, that you can be losing for 40 moves, trapped in a position that looks hopeless, and still find the one move that changes everything. You just have to be patient enough to keep looking. In the end, that's what Naomi Chen brought to Redwood State Penitentiary. Not just a game, but a framework for understanding that life, like chess, is about seeing patterns, learning from mistakes, and recognizing that the weakest piece on the board can become the most powerful if it survives long enough to reach the other side. Sometimes the best move is the one that looks impossible. Sometimes salvation comes not from force, but from teaching others to see the world differently. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to spend years saving everyone else first. Checkmate.